What's going on, guys? It's your boy Nick coming at you with a brand new Springans Albaz deck profile post Structure Deck Albaz Strike. For those of you that are aware, the Albaz Strike Structure Deck just came out today. I believe was the official release. And if you've been with me since the start of this channel, you'll know that I made a Springans deck profile very early on in the channel's life, and that was a hybrid between Springans and Suship, or Gunkin, as it was translated to the TCG. But that deck, I stated when I made that profile that that was just intended to be a very fun, very casual deck. I even stated in that video, if I'm not mistaken, that I didn't expect anybody to build that deck and take it to locals and dominate. It was something that was just very fun and cheese. You know, a deck to kind of introduce to somebody who was getting into the game for the first time, just to show them the basic mechanics. But now that the Albaz Strike Structure Deck released, it actually gave Springans quite a bit of a boost. And I do believe that this deck is a lot more viable now, post-Structure Deck, than it ever was prior. With that being said, though, for those of you that are new to the channel, welcome. My name is Nick. We do live duel videos, deck profiles, deck discussions. If those are things that you're interested in, then by all means, please smash that subscribe button, like this video, and leave a comment down below what your favorite part of the structure deck is. But with that being said, we're going to dive right in. And we're, as you can see here, we're starting things off with the monsters as usual. We are main decking triple copies of Springans Kitt. She is brand new out of the structure deck. Springans Kitt is actually really cool, being a dark level 4 beast effect monster. What she does is that if you have a fusion monster that mentions Fallen of Albaz as material on the field or in your graveyard, you can special summon the Springans Kitt from your hand. So she's pretty much your free extender as long as you have a fusion that's either on your board or in your graveyard that lists Albaz as a material. I think that's really strong and unique. Being like a free extender, something that Springans desperately needed. Also, I would argue that she, post-structure deck, is your best normal summon in the Springans deck. Why? Because on normal summon, she actually does something pretty impactful, and that is when she's normal or special summoned, she lets you add a branded spell or trap that's either banished in your deck or in your graveyard, and then you place a card from your hand in the bottom of the deck. So she's not a +1 on summon, but you basically break even. But she lets you search any branded spell trap, which obviously she can search branded fusion, which makes her extremely strong in this deck. Again, the focus of this deck isn't fusion summoning specifically. Springans are an Xyz archetype at heart, but it's nice to have access to some of the Albaz fusion support that Springans would otherwise have a very difficult time accessing prior to the deck being released. But now it's here. Springans Kitt is in archetype. You know, she's a Springans monster in name, so she's searchable off of cards that are in the deck, which we'll get into as we dive deeper into the profile. But yes, triple copies of Kitt. In my opinion, she is absolutely the best. But moving on to the Springans machine monsters, we play triple copies of Springans Rockey. Rockey, in my opinion, is like the second best normal summon in the deck, where if he's normal or special summoned, you can target a Great Sand Sea Golganda, which is their field spell. If you don't know that, we'll get into what that does later in the profile. Or a Springans monster that's in your graveyard, accept a copy of himself and add it to hand. So again, when he's normal or special, you can target the Springans field spell or a Springans monster in grave and add it back to your hand. The downside about this is that going first, that doesn't help you because turn 0, you don't have anything in graveyard yet. So that's why, like, I was stating that Springans Kitt now is like the best normal summon because she actually lets you add something from deck to hand, which previously none of the Springans monsters were able to do outside of like Branga, but even then that still required setup. But Rockey obviously is still really strong, like mid-game or late game, just being able to recur a lot of different resources. All the Springans machine monsters share the same effects to, if they are on the field, in your hand, or in the graveyard, they can reattach themselves as material to a Springans Xyz monster. I find that to be a pretty unique effect overall, but only the Springans machine main deck monsters share that effect. Springans Kitt cannot do that. Moving on though, triple copies of Springans Brothers. Brothers is absolutely awesome. Basically, if the card is sent from the hand or deck to the grave, you can target a Springans monster in your grave, except himself, and special summon it in defense position. A really cool combo is if you have Rockey in the graveyard and Brothers gets dumped from the hand or deck to grave, you can target the Rockey to special the Rockey from grave, and then Rockey triggers to then target the Brothers in the grave and add Brothers back to hand. So that's a pretty neat combo there. But for the most part, that's all Brothers is really utilized for. And then again, just like Rockey, he does have the secondary effect where he can reattach himself as an Xyz material to a Springans Xyz if he's on the field, in your hand, or in the graveyard. One copy of Springans Pedor. Again, this is the worst main deck Springans in my opinion, but you play it because it comes up every so often, and it is nice to have just the additional Springans name in the main deck. But what he does is he's kind of like a Lone Fire Blossom where he tributes himself to then target a Springans engrave and special summon it. But again, just like I stated with Rockey, going first, that's not really that great because like a lot of these cards require setup, and that's the issue that I had with Springans before the Structure Deck was released. Like, you didn't really want to draw them, but at the same time you needed them to facilitate your field spell plays. So it was like this weird love-hate relationship, but one copy of Pedor is more than enough. Like I said, his effect does come up enough times where I would warrant playing the one of in the deck. But moving on to the level 8s, you have 2 copies of Branga and then 2 copies of Captain Sargas. I'm going to explain these cards together. We'll start with Branga. Branga, he can banish himself and another Springans monster from grave to search a Springans card from the deck to your hand. That's a really powerful effect, especially now that we have Springans Kitt as an additional name in the deck. That's pretty nice. But that's pretty much all he does aside from that. Aside from also being able to attach himself to an Xyz as material from the hand, field, or graveyard. But besides that, you have Sargas. Now, in my opinion, Sargas is the better of the two, but I mean, Branga does come up so much that I think that they are still equal in terms of importance. But what Sargas does is that, again, same ability where if he's in the hand, field, or grave, he can attach himself to a Springans Xyz as material. While he is a Xyz material underneath a Springans Xyz monster, he grants that Xyz monster an additional 500 attack boost, which I think is pretty neat. But then aside from that is, during your opponent's turn as a quick effect, Captain Sargas can detach a material from any Xyz monster you control to then pop a face-up card in the opponent's field. And that is a quick effect during their turn, which I think is pretty cool. So you get like some added value, like with disruption, you have by having Sargas on board and having him there to detach stuff from your Xyz monsters. Note that it's any Xyz he can detach material from. Doesn't have to be a Springans one specifically, so there are some neat interactions there with some cool stuff. But that's it for the Springans main deck monsters. Now we're just going to move on to some of the other generic stuff we play. 1 copy of Supreme Sovereign Serpent of Golganda. This card is basically just a level 8 extender. It is a 3000 attack beat stick. It has 3000 attack because while you control Great Sand Seagull Golganda, its attack becomes 3000. Also, if you have a field spell in your field zone, he can special summon himself from the hand or the graveyard, but banish it when it leaves the field. And then also, if the Great Sand Seagull Golganda would be destroyed by a card effect, you can banish a monster from your graveyard instead, which is pretty cool. So 1 copy of that just helps you make rank 8s. But now moving into the Albaz stuff, we play 2 copies of Fallen of Albaz. This card has gotten so much support over the past few months that he is pretty much going to change this format so crazily. He's basically a super polymerization on legs. What that means is when he's normal or special summoned, you can discard a card to then fusion summon a fusion monster from your extra deck using monsters on either side of the field as material, including himself. He lets you fuse into stuff using your opponent's crap. So that's all you need to know. Extremely powerful card, especially this format. Then we play 1 copy of Incredible Ecclesia the Virtuous. Now, you don't necessarily need to run this card. I just run it just to have a pseudo 3rd copy of Albaz in the main deck. And the reason why I say that is because as a quick effect, she can tribute herself to special summon Albaz from the hand or deck, which I think is pretty neat. Also, if the opponent controls more monsters than you do, you can special summon her from the hand. So she's like this level 4 extender to help you make rank 4s. She's also a tuner, which means she gives you access to synchro plays potentially. And as an added benefit, if during the end phase, if a fusion monster was sent to the graveyard this turn and she's in the grave, you can add her back to your hand. So again, the only reason why you play one of it is because she can constantly recur herself every single turn whenever a fusion monster goes to grave, which just makes her pretty annoying for your opponent to deal with unless they address it specifically. But again, she's not really required in the deck, but she does come up enough where I think playing one is fine. But again, I understand that she is a little bit pricey, so if you can't afford to put this in the main deck, then it's like, make no mistake, it's not required, but if you have access to it, it doesn't hurt. But moving on, we play one Albion, the Shrouded Dragon. This is like our pseudo 4th copy of Albaz, because while he's in the field or the graveyard, his name becomes Fallen of Albaz. He does have some pretty cool effects, and they're very convoluted in how it's worded on the card, so I'll just kind of break it down. If he's in the hand or grave, you can send a Fallen of Albaz or a branded spell trap from your hand or deck to graveyard, and then depending on where you sent that card from, you can either special summon the Albion, or you can place him on the bottom of the deck, and then if the Albion was in the hand and that effect was activated, you get to draw a card. So think of it like a very convoluted upstart goblin with a Foolish Burial kind of effect attached to it. The reason why you played as a 1-of, again, is because it does treat itself as Albaz in certain conditions, which does help with making some of your fusion monsters, and definitely helps out with branded fusion as well. But that's it. We're going to dive into the hand traps we main deck. Triple copies of Ash. I think moving forward, Ash is really strong, given that we're moving into more of a fusion-focused format, and there's a lot of fusion spells in the game that tend to fuse using material from deck, which Ash can stop. So triple Ash, obviously, is usually really good. And then we're also on triple copies of Nibiru. I think Nibiru, this format's pretty crazy. If the opponent doesn't respect it, they'll lose to it. It's one of those crazy blowout hand traps that I think people tend to underestimate. Also, it is a light monster, which does matter for your branded fusion. So if necessary, you can dump this from deck to grave to fuse into something else, which just adds extra utility to the card overall. But that's it for the monsters, guys. We're going to dive into the spells. Triple copies of Great Sand Sea Gold Golganda. This is the Springans field spell. For those of you that don't know what it does, it grants all Springans Xyz monsters in the field 1,000 attack. Also, if you control no Springans Xyz monster, you can discard a Springans card to then special summon a Springans Xyz from your extra deck. It literally, for the cost of a discard, it cheats out an Xyz monster. What's not to like? As an additional effect as well, if a face-up Xyz monster you control leaves the field by a card effect, you can target a monster your opponent controls, and that monster cannot attack for the rest of this turn, even if the field spell leaves the field. So overall, all you need to know is that you can discard a Springans card from hand, and if you control no Springans Xyz, you can just special summon a Springans Xyz from your extra deck. So the field spell is just a free Xyz monster every single turn, pretty much, which is pretty cool. But moving on, we play triple copies of Springans Watch. This is a normal spell that's actually one of the craziest normal spells I think I've ever read. Basically, it lets you add Great Sand Sea Gold Golganda from your deck to your hand. So it functions as your 4th, 5th, and 6th copy of the field spell. However, it does something pretty unique, where if you already control Great Sand Sea Gold Golganda in your field zone, you can then choose to use this effect instead. And you can add a Springans monster from your deck to your hand, and if you do, you can send a Springans monster from your deck to the graveyard. This card is a Terraforming or a Rhoda and Foolish Burial all on one card. That's absolutely crazy in my opinion. Also note that Springans Watch can search for Springans Kitt, because Springans Kitt is a Springans card in name. But triple copies of Watch, obviously, it's just one of the greatest cards in my opinion. Then we're on 2 copies of Springans Booty. Sorry, I had to. But it is a continuous spell. Basically, it's your 7th and 8th copies of the field spell, because you can send this card from the field to the graveyard to then activate a Great Sand Sea Gold Golganda from your deck or your graveyard. So again, just more access to your field spell, because it is very important in this deck. But also, if a face-up Xyz monster you control leaves the field by a card effect, you can target an effect monster the opponent controls. Neither player can activate that effect monster's effects on the field this turn. So it's like an effect veiler, pretty much, whenever a Xyz monster leaves the field by a card effect, which is pretty cool. Then we play 2 copies of Branded and High Spirits. This card is a card that was not in the Structure deck. It actually just came out in Burst of Destiny, but this card is absolutely crazy. It is a quick play spell, and it states you can reveal a monster in your hand, and then you send a level 8 fusion monster from your extra deck to the graveyard with the same type that has 2500 attack or defense. So we'll pause right there. So basically, you reveal a Springans in your hand, a machine, for example. Then you can Foolish Burial from your extra deck to the graveyard a level 8 fusion monster that has the same type, in this case, machine. There is a machine level 8 Albaz fusion called Sprint. We'll get to that later, but this lets you dump Sprint from the deck to grave, so it's a Foolish. However, you can choose to add this additional effect to this card, where you can discard the revealed monster, and if you do, you can add Fallen of Albaz or one monster that lists that card in its text from the deck to your hand. So not only does this dump a level 8 fusion from your extra deck to the graveyard, you can then also discard the card you revealed to add Albaz himself or a card that mentions it in its text, which means you can search Springans Kitt, since Springans Kitt lists Albaz in her text. So this card is just nuts, and if that wasn't bad enough, during the end phase, if a fusion monster was sent to your graveyard this turn, you can add this card from the graveyard to your hand. So it's literally just a recurable resource, which is, again, why we're only playing 2 of it. Partly because Springans Kitt can search it, but because it can keep recycling itself throughout the course of the game. So I feel that having 3 copies is just a bit bricky in nature. I think 2 is the perfect ratio, but this card is, I think, hugely slept on and should definitely be looked at by anybody interested in playing the deck. But now we're on 1 copy of Branded Fusion. This will probably be the card that will get Verte banned. This card is just nuts. It lets you fuse using material from deck. Even better than Shrouded Fusion because you're not relying on your opponent to have a card in their field that will summon out of the extra deck. Like I said, this card is just nuts. Any fusion spell that lets you fuse from deck is crazy. Also, because it has fusion in the name, it means that you can dump it off of Verte, and then Verte copies this card's effects. Like this is just going to create so many degenerate combos, it's not even funny. The reason why we're only main decking 1 of it and not 3 is because, again, Springans is an Xyz-focused deck at heart. They're not trying to fusion summon every turn, but we play the 1 of because it's nice to have the option, and we can search it if we need it, which I think is pretty cool in that regard. 1 copy of Branded in White, again, because we do have the option to fusion summon at certain points during the game, and Branded in White is just a really cool card. It also can reset itself from the field, or back to the field, so it's a recurable resource again. We also play 1 copy of Overload Fusion. This is actually a pretty cool tech choice that I decided to main deck, not only because it can be dumped by Verte, but also because it lets you fusion summon into a Dark Machine fusion monster by banishing the materials listed on it from your field or in your graveyard. The Springans Albaz fusion monster that we play happens to be a Dark Machine, so there's just more access to get into that. We play the 1 copy of Terraforming as our 9th way to get to the field spell, because again, we need to see it, so Terraforming helps with that. 1 copy of Pot of Acquisitiveness. Again, the reason why is because we can target 3 banished monsters, shuffle all 3 back into the deck, and then draw a card. So this lets us like recur our resources while also giving us a draw in the process. Not required, but it's just something that I'm testing, and it's worked out pretty well thus far. 1 Called by the Grave to round out the spells. Now diving into the traps, we're on 1 copy of Springans Blast. This is like an in-archetype infinite impermanence. Basically, if you control a Springans monster, you choose an opponent's main monster zone. Note that it says choose a zone. You don't target the monster specifically, but then if a monster is in that zone, its effects are negated, and it cannot attack directly. Yeah, its effects are negated, and it can't attack directly. If you chose a zone that doesn't have a monster in it, then they cannot use that zone, which is pretty cracked. Also, if you control a fusion monster that lists Albaz as material, you can choose 2 zones instead. This card is pretty cool because it's a non-targeting effect negation, which is very often not seen that much in Yu-Gi-Oh! Like this can even address stuff like Dragoon, assuming you baited its negate, since it does not target, which I think is pretty cool. But 1 copy is all you need because you can search it whenever you need it. 1 copy of Springans Interluder, again, is a continuous trap. Basically what this does is when your opponent activates a card or effect, you can return a Springans Xyz monster you control to the extra deck to then apply one of these effects. You can negate that effect, or special summon a level 8 monster from your graveyard. So it pretty much turns your Springans Xyz monsters into Omni Negates or Monster Reborns, which I think is pretty cool. Also, as an additional benefit, if a face-up Xyz monster you control leaves the field by a card effect, you can make all monsters your opponent currently controls lose 1,000 attack until the end of this turn, even if this card leaves the field. So one of that. Then we play one copy of Screams of the Branded. This card, basically, if a fusion monster was sent to your graveyard this turn, you can special summon a fusion monster that's either banished or in your graveyard. So this just lets you recycle some of your resources. Also, during the end phase, if this card is in the graveyard because it was sent there to activate the effect of Fallen of Albaz this turn, you can set this card. So it's, again, like when they clear your board, or when they, like, if you're dumping stuff from your extra deck to the graveyard, you can revive some of your fusions that are banished or in your grave, as long as they were properly summoned first. So as a one-of, I think it's pretty unique. And then for the last card in the main deck, again, the main deck is 45 cards. We're on one copy of Branded Retribution. It's a counter trap. Basically, if when a spell trap card or monster effect is activated that includes an effect that special summons a monster, you can return to the extra deck a face-up fusion monster you control, or 2 fusion monsters in your graveyard that mention Fallen of Albaz as material. And if you do, negate the activation, and if you do that, destroy the card. So it's pretty much like an in-archetype Solemn Judgment of sorts. And then also, as an added benefit, you can banish this card from the grave to target a branded spell trap that's in your grave, accept a copy of Retribution to then add it to your hand. So overall, pretty cool, but that's it for the main deck. Again, 45 cards in the main. Now we're going to jump into the extra deck. We're on 2 copies of Springans Merrymaker as the Springans rank 4 of choice. It is, if it's special summoned from the extra deck, you can send a Springans monster from your deck to the grave. And then as a quick effect, during your opponent's main or battle phase, you can banish this card until the end phase. Then if you banish this card with 2 or more Xyz materials, you can also send a fusion monster from your extra deck to the graveyard that lists Fallen of Albaz as material. So this is a card that on summon Foolish Burial's a monster. It can dodge removal at quick effect speeds during the opponent's turn, while also being able to potentially dump fusion monsters that list Albaz from extra deck to the grave, which is just insane amounts of advantage that you'll gain. One copy of Time Thief Redoer. The reason why we play this as another rank 4 of choice is because Time Thief Redoer, just like Merrymaker, has a quick effect that allows it to banish itself, which does trigger the secondary effects of your field spell, your Springans Booty, and your Springans Interluder. Because an Xyz monster is leaving the field by a card effect, even if it's your own, it does trigger those additional beneficial effects, which is pretty cool. And Redoer is just a really awesome rank 4, so we play it. One copy of Drill Driver Vespertino. We play this because we can overlay it on top of an existing Merrymaker, making it so that we don't control a Springans Xyz, and we can utilize our field spell again to summon another Springans Xyz, which is pretty cool. One copy of Springans Ship X-Blower as the rank 8 Springans boss. Basically, you can choose one of your opponent's monster zones or spell trap zones, detach any number of materials from this card, and if you do, destroy the same number of cards your opponent controls in that chosen zone and its adjacent zones and or spell trap zones. So that's a little confusing, but basically you choose a zone. Again, note that it says choose. You're not targeting, so this is non-targeting destruction. You choose a zone, and then you can detach any number of materials to then destroy cards that are in that chosen zone or the zones adjacent to it or above and below it, almost like a T pattern or a plus pattern. So it's a very unique form of removal, and if you're not careful, something like this can easily completely obliterate someone's board if their card placement isn't like thought out well. That's what he does, and then again, as a quick effect, he can tag out during the opponent's main or battle phase. He can banish himself to the end phase, which makes him difficult to deal with, obviously, because then he keeps coming back, and then all the Springans machine monsters can keep reattaching themselves as material every single turn. So that's it for that. We play one copy of number 38, just to have an additional rank 8 of choice. If we're going first, sometimes making X-Blower doesn't make sense, obviously, so we decide to make this. And I think number 38 is a pretty strong card, being able to negate spells, especially when you're going into a format that's going to be very fusion summon heavy. But that's it for the Xyz monsters. We play one Synchro in the form of Cyframe Lord Omega. We play this just because it's probably single-handedly the best generic level 8 Synchro you can make. If you're questioning how we make this, remember Ecclesia is a tuner monster, so we can use her and any other level 4 to make this. And this card can like rip stuff out of the opponent's hand, recycle resources from the banish zone, so it does everything you need. Now we're going to move into some of the fusions. One copy of Mirror Jade, the Ice Blade Dragon, brand new out of the Structure Deck. Mirror Jade is absolutely crazy. It requires Fallen of Albaz plus a fusion, synchro, Xyz, or link monster. Remember, Fallen of Albaz is a super poly on legs, so if they stick a Fallen of Albaz, they can fuse using your crap on your side of the field to make this a 3k beater that has a quick effect, can banish a monster on the field by sending a fusion monster that lists Albaz as material from the extra deck to the graveyard as cost. So even if you negate the banishing effect, they still get the dump from the extra deck, which is crazy. Then if that wasn't bad enough, if this card leaves the field by an opponent's card, which means even if they kaiju this, during the end phase of that turn, you can destroy all of your opponent's monsters. This card is just absolutely nuts. Watch out for that moving forward. But anyway, oops, hold on, getting some camera trouble there. There we go. Sorry about that. Moving on, we're playing one copy of Lubellion, the Searing Dragon. Again, this is brand new out of the Structure Deck. This lets you, when it's fusion summoned, you can discard a card to then fusion summon again using material that's on your field, in your graveyard, or banished by shuffling it back into the deck, which is pretty cool. So it's just a fusion that leads into another fusion monster. Which is pretty nice. But now we play two copies of Sprind the Iron Dash Dragon. This is the Springans in Archetype Albaz Fusion. It is a Dark Machine Fusion monster requiring Fallen of Albaz plus any effect monster special summoned this turn. That is also really crazy, very generic. And what this does is it can, during the main phase, you can move this card to a, you can move this card you control to another of your main monster zones, then destroy all other face-up cards in this card's column. So it almost has like a Mech Knight kind of effect, where it can jump zones and then nuke everything that's in the column it lands in, which is pretty nice. Again, non-targeting. As an added benefit, during the end phase, if this card is sent to the graveyard this turn, you can either add to your hand or special summon a Fallen of Albaz or a Springans monster. So obviously we play Springans, in the main deck, so 2 copies of Sprind is almost required. Then we play one copy of Brigand the Glory Dragon and one copy of Albion the Branded Dragon, just to have additional targets to dump off of stuff like Mirror Jade. Brigand is pretty nice though, because you can still fusion summon these using Branded Fusion as well. Brigand can't be destroyed by battle, and it makes it so your opponent's monsters cannot target your monsters. Also, if it's sent to the graveyard during the end phase, you can add Albaz or special it from deck. Albion, upon fusion summon, lets you fusion summon again by banishing material from the hand, field, or grave. So it's a fusion that puts another fusion body out there. And then also, if it's sent to the graveyard during the end phase, you can add to your hand or set a branded spell trap directly from your deck. So those are also pretty cool. And then we play one Verte. To be honest, I have a funny feeling that Verte might be getting banned in the near future, just based on how things are turning out. So we run it for now because we can. It's foolish not to, given the cards we have access to. But if the card does get banned, just understand that Verte is not required for this deck to function properly. And then for the last card in the extra deck is one copy of Bujinki Ahashima, just to help us facilitate some of our Xyz plays a little bit easier. But that's it, guys, for the extra deck. Hopefully you enjoyed that profile. We're going to briefly dive into the side deck before we wrap things up. The side deck's pretty straightforward. Triple copies of Lava Golem just to help us break boards when going second. Again, yes, you cannot normal summon or set the turn you use Golem, but that doesn't matter because off of our field spell, we can discard a card to then special summon an Xyz monster for free pretty much, so the Golem restriction doesn't really hinder us all that much. We play one copy of Starving Venom Fusion in the side because we're side decking triple copies of Super Poly. Since we're going into a heavy fusion focused format moving forward, I think Super Poly is a card that should definitely be respected. This is going to be breaking boards left and right. So I think having it on the side is just your silver bullet against certain matchups. Then for your control or floodgatey matchups, we're on triple Cosmic Cyclone and one Harpy's Feather Duster, just to clear any annoying back row we might come across, again, for our trap-heavy decks. And then the next couple cards I'm going to show you are total flex spots, and that is Ice Dragon's Prison and 2 copies of Crackdown. We play this just because we can steal our opponent's stuff with Ice Dragon's Prison. Yes, you have the added benefit of being able to banish stuff that's the same type, but that's an optional effect. At the end of the day, this allows us to just steal cards out of their graveyard, which we can use for our own purposes, which I think is pretty cool. But also, Crackdown functions in a similar fashion, but instead of stealing out of their grave, you just take it from their field. So you can take resources that they need to prevent them from comboing off, and then use their resources to facilitate your own extra deck plays, like Ecclesia summoning or fusion summoning, which I think is pretty funny. But again, these are total flex spots. They're not really required. Something that you could consider as well is a card called Barrage Blast. I thought I had a playset of this lying around somewhere, but for some reason I couldn't find the other copies of it, so I didn't bother putting it in the deck, because if you're going to play it, I would suggest you play 3. But this is something you can also consider for the side. What it does is that once per turn, you can detach any number of materials from machine exceeds monsters you control to then target that many cards on the field and destroy them. But again, that's just up for consideration. But that's it for the profile, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed everything that I brought to you today. Stay tuned for more upcoming content. And like I said, leave a comment down below on what you thought of the profile. Like the video and subscribe if you haven't done that already.